One of the reasons Rwanda has recovered so well is energy therapy spread like wildfire in Rwanda. We had teams of volunteers going in there in the late 90s, less than 10 years after the civil war in Rwanda, and energy therapy spread widely all over the country there. So we want to do the same thing in these other hotspots.
Thank you so much for joining us for another awesome episode of Bioenergetics Beat. I'm Heather Gray, a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and certified bioenergetic practitioner, and this episode is brought to you today by Nikki, Unleash the Wellness Within. It's a non-invasive, easily affordable, and highly effective approach to optimize wellness. It's a wearable device that puts frequency better based life in your hands and on your wrist. You'll make sure to stick to the very end because, as usual, we have an amazing giveaway, but you're not going to want to miss 1 second out of what my next guest is going to have to say because he is absolutely incredible. I've interviewed him before. I've been following him for quite some time now, and he is just got so much amazing information. We're going to have so much fun. Your mind's going to be blown. Let's give it up for Dawson Church.
That sounds like a wonderful introduction. How can we go wrong from that point on, Heather? I'm all for it. I'm all in.
Right. Let's have some fun. Let's tell us a little bit about yourself, Dawson. Like, how did you? I love, as best-selling science writer, author of 3 award-winning books. 2 of them we're going to talk about later on in the show. But it's a lot of stuff that most people aren't still talking a lot about. So how did you kind of get started in this line of work and talking about this specific, epigenetics and frequency and energy and mind over matter and that type of stuff?
Well, I grew up in a kind of fundamentalist Christian household, really middle of the road, and then got exposed to Eastern spirituality in my teenage years. And when I learned energy healing, I saw miracles happen. Literally, I saw wounds close up in seconds. I saw chronic illnesses disappear. And energy healing had things that conventional medicine didn't have. So later in my life, I began to get curious about measuring those things. So that's what science does. And we've known for a long time that energy heals. We know things like acupuncture. There are about 20,000 studies of acupuncture, and they show that it heals all kinds of not just acute illnesses, but chronic ones as well. And so what science is now doing is allowing us to measure the extent of those healings. And for example, acupressure research shows that acupressure-based techniques, in terms of effectiveness, medical effectiveness in meta-analyses, are dramatically, orders of magnitude better than what we do with conventional drugs or surgery. So these are showing us now, as we measure them, that these seemingly intangible healing methods actually are incredibly potent. And that's why I'm so into science. I've published several best-selling science books. I've been involved in over 100 clinical trials. And the results from all of this, again, in your words, Heather, are mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And that's why at this company, they're right now I'm delivering frequencies through red light, and a lot of people think that that's still on the woo woo, but we've got so much, research behind red light frequencies, how our cells communicate through frequency, light, and sound. It's just absolutely incredible. I love the work that you've done with the veterans too. I noticed that you offer PTSD treatment to over 22,000 veterans. How did you get involved in working with veterans?
Because pure science and pure measurement, ivory tower analysis is not applicable to society unless we do stuff with the information. So, for example, right now we're working with a group of therapists in Haiti. We're working with another group of therapists in Ukraine. We've worked with veterans, a lot of veterans, and we want to apply these discoveries to pressing social problems, poverty, PTSD, stress. Veterans who, like Vietnam veterans, look at the numbers of Vietnam veterans. They have much shorter lifetimes, much higher incidences of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, hepatitis, smoking, all of these conditions. So it's great to do a study, and I can tell you that the efficacy of acupressure-based techniques for PTSD is double that of conventional therapies. But then we want to take that knowledge and apply it to real social problems like people dying early or living their whole lives burdened by trauma. Like one veteran I worked with, he was so triggered that when someone walked into the room, I was working with him with a plastic water bottle and crinkled the water bottle. the sound of it was so triggering, he wanted to dive under the table. And he served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, and he was carrying around this burden of hypervigilance, avoidance, insomnia, anxiety, all these other ills. After only about a 30-minute session with energy therapies only, no psychotherapy, no depth analysis, simply energy therapy, shifting his energy body, energy system, he could hear that same sound without a reaction. So these therapies are powerful. We need to apply them to the people who need the most.
Absolutely. I absolutely love how simple yet effective that these protocols can be, because a lot of times people poo-poo the effectiveness of it because it's not, some pill, or it seems too quote unquote easy, right? But really, when we start working with the bioenergetic field, it's amazing what then physically, the rest of the body, the mind can come along and do things without actually having to relive traumas, like in talk therapy. I've never been a real big fan of talk therapy because it has a tendency to keep people triggered, right? But when you can kind of go in the bioenergetic field, the energy work, it's just beautiful things can happen.
Yeah, energy comes first, like Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. Energy, is first. After that comes m, matter, times the constant squared. And so energy is primal. And for example, in the 1930s, a famous set of researchers at Harvard and Yale were doing experiments, and they were led by a man called Harold Saxton Burr. And he was working with salamanders, and he would look at the like he'd use a simple early form of an MRI, and he'd look at the magnetic and electromagnetic actual signature of the salamander. Then they would sever a salamander's leg, and salamanders can regenerate. And they would find that the energy field of the leg was still there even after the physical leg was gone, and that as the physical leg regrew, it regrew along the lines of the energy template provided by the bioelectrical field of the creature. So it's, I mean, from our earliest times, from birth, if you take an embryo and you figure out which is the positive and negative pole, and you mark, as he was doing this in the 30s, if you mark the positive pole, when that creature is born, whether it's a human being, whether it's a monkey, whether it's a chick, whether it's a salamander, that little mark is right on top of the head. We are positive up here. We're negative in the soles of our feet. We are energy beings. And so it's not like you're gonna never need drugs, never need surgery. I mean, I've had surgery, I take some medications, but the first line of defense, always the first line of wellness, is energy.
Absolutely. We were just talking before I got on. I had nasal surgery last week. So if I sound like, Rudolph, all congested and stuffed up, that's why. But it was fascinating how much I've used this and my other energy tools to help with detox, to help with stress, to help with sleep, because again, all these other things are just going to help speed up, right, the healing of the surgery that I had to have done. I tried a lot of energetic things beforehand before I went to surgery. That was my last resort. But when your
Good for
septum is
you.
so deviated, right? Like there's not no amount of energy work is gonna, reset a bone like that. I mean, at least I haven't figured that out yet. Maybe somebody has, but I have not.
Yeah, I had a torn Achilles tendon 3 years ago, and
Ouch.
it's like it's just a torn Achilles tendon. It's just severed, and they measured like a 4 inch gap between the two halves. It's like that is not going to regrow. You have to go and have surgery. So we're in this era in healing where we have this ancient wisdom. I mean, acupuncture is tens of thousands of years old. That we've shown that Europeans knew about acupuncture, not just Chinese. Europeans knew about it 6,000 years ago. They knew about acupuncture points, and so we know that these energy methods are available. We know now today that nutrition is really important. So we have this ancient knowledge, we have modern wisdom, we have modern medicine. We have the best of all possible worlds, and it's not like you're going to rely on one thing for all complaints you're going to have in your lifetime. You need that whole range of things. In my earlier book, Soul Medicine, I have a chapter 14, called How to Work with Your Ideal Healing Team. And it shows you how to work with all of these different people on your healing team effectively together. When to go for energy healing, when to go for conventional medicine. And you need to understand that you have all of these things available to you now, which again, our ancestors didn't have.
Absolutely. Yeah, it bothers me when people are like, I tried this and it didn't work, but they're, still eating McDonald's, or they're still in the middle of their trauma, their horrible marriage. And I'm like, this isn't a magic bullet. Like, this is a tool in your toolbox. Just like so many other amazing tools out there. But I love the fact that you talked about having a team, because really it does take a team when it comes to completely healing. So that's awesome. This is a great spot. We're going to take a quick break for a commercial. When we come back, I want to dive deeper into two of your book, the Genie in Your Genes and Mind to Matter, because they're just two conversations I absolutely love having, because they're just crucial to people who are dealing with chronic illness like Lyme and mold and autoimmune and PTSD. And so don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my favorite and probably my most impactful frequency that I use on the Nikki. If you've never seen this before, it looks like a little watch, but it's actually a frequency device with a bunch of different frequencies. It's bioenergetic, so it has this little frequency light situation that goes into your arm, and it pretty much makes an immediate difference. But my personal favorite frequency is the insomnia one. If you know me, you know I don't sleep at night. I'm known for like those middle of the night texts and random thoughts, and I have been that way my whole life, not just since I got sick with tick-borne illness. But the Nikki nighttime and or insomnia frequency is basically programmed to work with your body's natural resources to get you to go to sleep and get you set for nighttime. It helps with cellular repair and detoxification overnight, which is super, super important for everyone, but especially with people with Lyme and tick-borne illness like me. So I just wanted to kind of demystify it and share a little bit about it. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Bye.
Nikki puts a personal wellness center in your hands and on your wrist. Be better. Do better. We are Nikki.com.
Fantastic. Welcome back. I'm super excited to jump in. I want to learn more about your books, your Genie in the Genes and Mind to Matter. Can you tell us a little bit more about them, their premise? Like, where did you come up with the idea around this? Why did you want to put it out in the world? What drove you to write these books?
Well, Genie in Your Genes is all about epigenetics. And for decades now, we've known that the environment around the cell affects the cell. We know that in fetuses, for example, much of fetal development is driven by epigenetic influences. And there are lots of other studies and evidence for epigenetics, the effect of the ability of influences from outside the cell, even outside the body, to affect gene expression and then hormones, enzymes, neurotransmitters, all kinds of subsequent molecules. And a simple example is cortisol. When we're stressed, say you have a near miss on the freeway in your car, your cortisol is going to rise, your adrenaline is going to rise. It'll drop a few minutes later, but it rises very, very sharply. And those genes are called immediate early genes. They reach peak expression, they're turned on by stress, and they reach peak expression in 3 seconds. So we human beings have this super fast stress response. In response to epigenetic stimuli like danger, we make those cortisol molecules. The problem is when we make cortisol, we have to tear apart another molecule called DHEA to create cortisol. And DHEA is our main health and youthening hormone. So when cortisol goes up, DHEA goes down, and the two of them exist in inverse proportion. So that's the way an actual stressor will affect our gene expression and hence our internal biochemistry. But if we go back home that night and tell our kids and our parents and our spouse and our friends all about the fender bend or the near miss on the freeway, and get ourselves stressed, our heart's going to pound, our lungs are going to contract, all these things go on in our bodies, stress is happening again, and that is a signal, an epigenetic signal now driven by thought alone and emotion for our bodies to make cortisol. And so I've done several clinical trials of cortisol, and we find people, Heather, this is just crazy. Some of them were done in hotels. And so here's somebody sitting in the lobby of the Four Seasons. I mean, it's just gorgeous. There's a fountain. There are live birds singing. There are beautiful fresh cut flowers everywhere. I measure their cortisol. Their cortisol level looks like it would be if they were in Jurassic Park being chased by T-Rex. And they're doing it all by thought alone. They're doing it all with just by thinking themselves into stress. And it ages the body. It produces loss of muscle mass, loss of bone density, loss of skin elasticity, loss of learning and memory neurons in the brain. All these negative side effects as a result of this. So I got really interested in all of this when I was looking into epigenetics, and I wrote the book, The Genie in Your Genes. It's gone to sell over 100,000 copies. It's been in print for almost 20 years now. It's gone through several editions, and the fundamental premise is still so true. And the good news is that by lowering stress, you have the opposite effect. You turn off the genes that code for cortisol. You then make less cortisol, more DHEA, more of your youthening hormone, which again has all kinds of downstream effects in the body. That's just one simple example I use in Genie in Your Genes, but it shows you all of the ways, not only the ways this happens, but the way we can make it unhappen. And a lot of it through energy therapies. Energy therapies are extraordinarily effective at producing epigenetic change in the body. And I've done research. I mean, this isn't just a bright idea. Go into PubMed, the US government's database, and just look at Google Dawson Church, and you'll see many clinical trials that show the effects of these seemingly intangible things, peak states, meditation, bioenergy on genes, and literally turning off genes in our bodies. And so that's what that book's all about. And it's really exciting. And we've only scratched the surface of what we can do epigenetically for our own well-being.
Absolutely. I work for a cancer doctor as a coach in her practice right now, and it's still such the old dogma that if it's in your genes, it's meant to happen. And I'm trying to unbrainwash these people that no, your lifestyle, your thoughts, your stress level, toxins, all these things actually play more into what gets expressed and what doesn't than your actual, just quote unquote genes. So I love the fact that we're having this conversation today because
one recent study about this is it's to do with Alzheimer's. And when I was growing up and I was taking classes in college, the Alzheimer's gene was well understood. It's called the apogene, APOE, and apogene 4 is strongly associated with getting Alzheimer's disease. And if you get one apogene 4 from your mother, one from your father, so you are an apogene 4/4. What I was taught back then in the 70s in college was that you have a 92% chance of developing Alzheimer's. If you have an apogene 3/4 combination, you have about a 75% chance of developing Alzheimer's. So strongly genetically encoded disease. And yet now a new study was published recently showing that far more important than your apogene is the 2 pounds of gray and white matter between your ears. People with negative emotional explanatory frameworks, people who were negative thinkers, had higher proportions of Alzheimer's plaques in their brain than positive thinkers. Positive thinking was protective against Alzheimer's, and that was more strongly associated with not having Alzheimer's than the gene itself. So positive thinking or negative thinking literally was turning on gene expression. Another example I use in Genie in Your Genes is twin studies, where one twin gets cancer and the other doesn't at the age of 2 years old. Now, why is one twin getting cancer, a strongly genetically coded disease, and the other not getting cancer? They're living in exactly the same house, eating the same food. They're even wearing the same outfits because their mom thinks they look cute, wearing the same dresses, and one gets cancer and one does not. And again, in that particular case history I described in the book, the one little girl at 6 months old had a tonsillectomy, and they think that the stress of the tonsillectomy triggered cancer 18 months later. And so stress is such a degrader of all of your functions. And so it's usually far more impactful than what genes you have. It's not whether you have the gene or not, it's whether the gene is turned on. And again, positive thinking, spiritual experiences, energy medicine, all of these things are literally silencing those Alzheimer's genes and those cancer genes. In one study, we found that 72 genes were changed in 1 hour of an energy therapy called EFT tapping, emotional freedom techniques. 1 hour of psychotherapy changed 72 genes, including bowel cancer genes, including throat cancer genes, prostate cancer genes, breast cancer genes. All of those genes were regulated by a single hour of EFT. So these are powerful epigenetic tools we have at our disposal.
It was fascinating. I just watched the Christopher Reeves story, Superman. and how his wife, who had never smoked a day in her life, died 18 months after he died of lung cancer. It's fascinating when I work with people and I start to work backwards with them and ask them what happened around the time of your diagnosis, and they go, oh, or even the ACE scores, right? Adverse childhood experiences, and the higher the ACE score, the linked more to chronic illness, autoimmune as you get older and adults. So we're starting to find out that very, very much so, stress and these horrible things that happen correlate to things later on in life. Like I said, even more so than your genes. So I love that. Let's dive deeper into the Mind to Matter book. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, the first half of Mind to Matter is mostly about changes inside your body. And again, what I just described to you about cortisol, that's pretty well known. It's pretty intuitive. Hey, I think stressful thoughts, I'm changing my internal biochemistry. And when I began writing Mind to Matter, I was pretty agnostic about the whole idea of thoughts to things. And my wife is an ardent devotee of the teachings of Abraham Hicks, Esther Hicks, Abraham, and the law of attraction. And they teach that your internal state, your mind creates your reality. As a scientist, I was less sure about that, so I thought, well, let's apply the lens of science to this and see what's true. And I thought, okay, there's a link between the thought and the thing, and there are a lot of links in that chain. There are a lot of different components of that. Let's look at each one of them and the research evidence for all of them and see to what extent we can show or not show that thoughts equals things. Now, again, it's really easy in terms of your body. That negative thinking you're having is making your adrenal glands pump out cortisol. But the second half of the book is all about the effects of your thoughts outside your body. And one of the most fascinating series of experiments is on water. They began in the 1960s by a Canadian researcher called Bernard Grad. And what he would do is he would have a healer bless a pitcher of water. Then he had a second pitcher of water that was unblessed. And then he would take both pitchers, apply them to seeds, and catalog how fast they grew. And in his studies, essentially the seeds would grow about twice as fast, twice as big with watered with the blessed water than with the controlled water. So that was really interesting. Something's going on over there. But what? And then later studies with more elaborate equipment in the 1990s and up to 2000 showed that the atomic bond, the bonding angle between the two little hydrogen atoms and the big oxygen, H2O, it's always 104.5 degrees. It's just a chemical fact. That angle at which those two H's bond to the O is 104. Unless someone does this, they take that water and they hold it and they bless it. And then guess what? That angle shrinks. And that water becomes slippery. And when you water plants with it, when you water your own body with it, then it makes you more healthy. So some of the studies, for example, showed Qigong masters blessing water and that molecular bond between those molecules changing. So now we knew what the mechanism was. The hydrogen and oxygen bonding in those water molecules were changing. And those studies have now been replicated several times over. They then said it to the Qigong master, well, maybe it's just because you're so close to the water over here. Step into the next room. Let's see if the water changes. Just send your healing intention distantly into the water. So he did that, and the water changed. Then they said, well, let's put you a mile away. Let's see if a mile away it's going to affect it as well. A mile away, exactly the same effect. Then they said, okay, 1,000 miles away. So they moved him all the way across halfway across the world. And from 1,000 miles away, his intention could change the molecular structure of water. So it's amazing that we even have the ability to change the structure of molecules outside of our bodies, especially water. And when you reflect on the fact that the planet is 70% water, our bodies are 70% water, but of that 30% that isn't water, of that 30%, 29% of the atoms in those other non-water substances are actually H2O. So we have a tremendous effect on our bodies, again, by the quality of our experience, energy, and thoughts. So the second half of the book is all about how people affect things distantly. And those studies of distant healing, how can I have a healing intention for somebody who is 1,000 miles away? and it affects them measurably. In some studies, there are people in shielded, called Faraday cages, and they have lead walls, they have multiple layers of copper mesh, they screen out all known radiation. Even in a Faraday cage, when the person outside the Faraday cage has their eye movement stimulated by light, the person in the Faraday cage shows similar activation of the optical nerve and circuits in the brain. So we have these amazing abilities, which we are barely scratching the surface of, to affect the world around us as well as the world within us. And Mind to Matter chronicles exactly how we do that.
That's absolutely incredible. So tell us a little bit about, what are some of the, where am I going with this? Brain fart happens sometimes. What are you working on these days? I know you got a new book coming out, but do you not just, are you putting books out in the world? Do you actually work with people? Like, what really gets you going these days? What are you working on?
Well, I meditate a lot. I meditate about an hour or two every morning, not because I feel I ought to, because in my other book, Bliss Brain, I talk about the neurochemicals of ecstasy. Anandamide. Anandamide has the same chemical structure as THC, the active ingredient in marijuana. So you meditate in a certain way, you produce lots of anandamide, and you go into bliss. You produce lots of serotonin. Serotonin has the same chemical structure as psilocybin. So you sit there for an hour or two in the morning, and you're just in this totally blissed out state. You then move into your workday. So I do that. I also try and spend a few days every month on retreat, just getting away from it all, spending time in a quiet place, going into these states of what in the Yoga Sutras is called samadhi, and spending time there. And then I go away for usually a month or two every year, and just go away completely. And I work like crazy the other 10 months, but 2 months is set aside for just retreat and reading and spiritual study and practice. So that's really powerful for me. And then the rest of my time is spent, I have a big training company called EFT Universe. We have training materials for therapists, for coaches. We train thousands of people every year. We have a lot of individual programs for insomnia, anxiety, weight loss, because it turns out when you change your energy, all of these other downstream problems get better. Maybe it doesn't solve them completely, but often it does. And so physical pain, for example, after an energy treatment, the average reduction in pain is 65%. Two-thirds of the pain just goes away. Chronic pain, acute pain. It's just amazing how this happens. So a lot of my workday is spent on the company. Then I have the nonprofit. And the nonprofit, we do research, and we do things like the Veteran Stress Solution, which gets free treatment to veterans, and also projects like Ukraine and other hotspots in the world where people so need help. I mean, the suffering, like the effects of these wars, like in Syria, Ukraine, Gaza, the horrors of the genocide going on in Gaza right now. I mean, these things are going to affect those people. And we think it's we think it's the Russians, or we think it's the Israelis. But I can tell you that on both sides of the divide, we don't want to tell the Ukrainians this, but we are determined to treat the Russians equally, and give them as much access to these things as the Ukrainians get right now. We can't get into Russia at the moment, but we have plans to do that later on with some Russian-speaking practitioners. So we want to see the world heal, not just the victims, but the perpetrators as well. In Rwanda, we work
Hurt
with
people.
hurt people. And in
You know.
Rwanda, one of the reasons Rwanda has recovered so well is energy therapy spread like wildfire in Rwanda. We had teams of volunteers going in there in the late 90s, less than 10 years after the civil war in Rwanda. And energy therapy spread widely all over the country there. So we want to do the same thing in these other hotspots.
EFT is so fascinating. It is one of the first tools I'll use with others, but it's like the first tool I forget to use for myself for some reason. It's so bizarre. Right? Like usually if somebody's like, I'm stressed and I'm anxious, and I'm like, oh, let's do some tapping. But like when I'm going through something, I'm like, what do I need? And I forget, but it's such a beautiful, easy, eloquent tool. Like it's incredible. I love the fact that you teach EFT. So we're getting to that point in the show, the shameless plug time. So where can people find you? Of course, we'll have stuff in the show notes, but yeah, where can people find you?
A couple of different places, but the most important place is dawsongift.com. My name, Dawson, Dawson, gift.com. And you can download the free EFT mini manual there. So download the manual and focus on one thing that bothers you. Spend 2 minutes tapping. There's a tapping diagram in the back. Just spend 2 minutes tapping, and you'll feel immediately the effect this has in your body. There's also a meditation there called eco meditation, and we've done numerous studies with EEGs, MRIs, other instruments on eco meditation. It rapidly shifts brain function. It's simple, it's evidence-based, it's not spiritual, it's purely physiological cues you send your body, relaxation. All of that's at dawsongift.com. And that's also the portal to our practitioner database. You can find our certified practitioners, our online classes, our courses, all of those things through dawsongift.com. But the first two things to do are download the meditation and start doing it today. Tap and download the manual, tap today, just tap the first time, and you'll feel a difference in your body.
That's incredible. What an awesome gift. And make sure to also visit wearenikki.com/podcast and enter in BioBeats for 10% off. And because we love and appreciate our customers so much, we give away a free Nikki device with a wellness suite of frequencies on every show. It's a $598 value, so huge. So make sure to go to the show notes to figure out how to sign up for that. And stay tuned. Have a healthy day, and thanks for joining us.
There's a new word for wellness, Nikki. Nikki, the bioenergetic wearable designed to help you feel better and perform better. Other wearables just track how you're doing. Nikki is about helping you do better. Touch the Nikki screen to choose the frequency you want for what you want to do and how you want to feel. Nikki puts a personal wellness center in your hands and on your wrist. Be better, do better. Wearenikki.com.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I came to use the Nikki actually through my sister who was working for the company at the time, and she had been speaking to me about the frequencies on there and how it had really helped with stress and anxiety and things like that. And I had thought, well, I have stress and anxiety, maybe this can help me too. And in addition to therapy and other things I was trying to do to help myself, I thought this might be an additional tool that would help me. The nighttime frequency really helps me with my sleeping. The pain frequency, I have some issues with my shoulders and that seem to have gotten a lot better. These things I knew nothing about when I got it. So it kind of morphed for getting it for one reason and kind of helping with other things. I found actually the biggest benefit I found is I am prone to UTIs. And I was always on medication, always going to the doctor, always getting them. And the first time I got one after I had the Nikki, I thought it has the viruses and bacteria. Let's try it. Well, since then, I've had it for over a year. Normally would have about 5 to 6 UTIs in that time. I've had 2 that I've needed medication for, and the rest, I feel it coming on. I put on my viruses and bacteria, and within 3-4 days, it's completely gone. I don't have to have medication. I don't have to go to the doctor or do anything like that. So it's been, in that way, life-changing for me.
Nikki puts a personal wellness center in your hands and on your wrist. Be better, do better. Wearenikki.com. The views, information, and opinions expressed in this content are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Freemedica. Freemedica Technologies, Inc. and its employees are not responsible, nor verifies accuracy any of the information contained in the following content. The primary purpose of this content is to educate and inform. This content does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services.